None of the content on this or any episode of the Kratom Science Podcast, Kratom Science Journal Club, or on any pages of the website kratomscience.com should be considered medical claims or medical advice. This is the Kratom Science Journal Club with Dr. Jonathan Cachet, neuroscientist and expert in psychopharmacology. In each episode, we discuss an article in a peer-reviewed journal. I'm your host, Brian Gallagher, blog and social media writer for KratomScience.com, your source for all things Kratom. So far, we've been able to bring you the Kratom Science Podcast and Kratom Science Journal Club without advertisements or solicitations for donations, but we do need your support. If you would please like, subscribe, rate, review, comment on whatever podcast platform you're listening to. This will help spread the word, help more people learn about Kratom, which we hope will lead to positive outcomes and better policy. This study was pretty interesting. It was out of Indonesia, and we hadn't looked at anything like this before, but it was called, the title of the study is Antibacterial The title of the study is Antibacterial Mechanism of Kratom Methanol Extract on Streptococcus Pneumoniae and E-Coli bacteria. So they're testing Kratom, and this is in vitro. Right in, I guess, petri dishes. They're taking a methanol extract of kratom and seeing what it does on this. But before, I thought it was strep throat because it's Streptococcus pneumonia, but it's actually not strep throat. It is a different kind. The main cause of community-acquired pneumonia and meningitis in children and the elderly, and of sepsis in those infected with HIV. So it's a bacteria that causes pneumonia. And meningitis, apparently. The main cause of it. And E. coli, I think everybody knows what that is. It's found in food, and it's a mostly stomach condition. This is a team in Indonesia. I'm not even going to try to pronounce the university, but it's abbreviated UNUSA. It's a university in the city of Surabaya in the eastern part of the island of Java. The island of Java is south of the island of Kalimantan. Kalimantan is where all the commercial kratom grows for export into the U.S. market. Oh wait, I have a pronunciation here that I linked. Let's see. Oh, it's for that one condition.
Streptococcus Pneumoniae.
Streptococcus Pneumoniae.
Oh, there you go. Yep.
I guess they found in general that it says it calls quercetin a secondary metabolite of Mitragyna speciosa, which interacts with the ATP1 protein as a predictor in the mechanism of Mitragyna speciosa as an antibacterial. However, is that right to call it a metabolite? Because the translation was a little bit off in this, I think. It might be the translation, or maybe I'm just not understanding, but it's also a flavonoid, isn't it? And I thought flavonoids were inherent in the plant and not a metabolite of the plant.
Well, so what I would say is any compound the plant produces would be a metabolite. Anything that is made and put together from protein building blocks within the plant could be considered a metabolite. But I think that you're right in that, more accurately, it could be classified as a flavonoid. But basically it's the compound that they believe is being made by kratom that has antibacterial activity.
Okay. And this quercetin, I think, also occurs in other plants. It's not just kratom. Let me look it up.
I would agree with you there on that. Yeah, I don't think it's anything it's not a The word coming to my mind is calvatone, but that would be for kava kava. But it's not a kratom specific alkaloid.
Yeah. And I think I wrote that in my notes somewhere.
Found in many fruits, vegetables, leaves, seeds, grains, capers, red onions, and kale.
Yeah, I have that. Yep. So they're saying that's the thing that caused it. So it's not necessarily, I guess it's not necessarily the kratom that helps with this, but they did find that. So testing the antibacterial activity of kratom leaf extract against these two bacteria as carried out with 8 variations of concentration, everything from 0.78% to 100%, and they found that the more, well, actually it didn't go higher. It went to a certain point. The bacteria became less and less present. Is that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. With the kratom extract, this methanol extract. And so you said you thought initially when you looked at this it might be the methanol that's actually eliminating the bacteria.
Well, I think that almost all of those like alcohols, ethanols, methanols, have antibacterial, like antimicrobial properties. It's like would be like cleaning something with alcohol, or sterilizing something with alcohol. I think it just basically destroys any lipid membranes or cell walls or anything of that matter. But looking at it a little bit closer, so they made this methanolic extract. They took about 2 kilograms of powder, and then they put it in 96% methanol. Then they like macerated it, so like beat it up and stirred it, and then they did a rotovap water bath. So that rotary evaporation is like a real slow moving ball, like classic cartoon scientific lab, piece of equipment to presumably evaporate off a large amount of the methanol. So I knew this is where we were going. So I was looking a little bit closer. There is no indication that they say that they got a thick 20-gram crude methanol extract and stored that at minus 20 degrees at the end of the day. But what percentage of methanol was still there, I guess, is just my question. But now that I'm talking about it out loud, too, I think that some of the, like, did they do the control that had very little, like, did they just do a methanol control? I don't remember seeing that.
No, I don't think so. And I think there was a lot that was left out. I think they didn't really, it wasn't really detailed, but there was something in the discussion section that said, in line with this study, previous studies have shown the effectiveness of Nitrogenous speciosa as an antimicrobial of several types of extract solvents. So I think that's what they had to maybe explain that it wasn't only the methanol, but I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I assume it's at very small concentrations. If they had it evaporate off for 24 hours or so. Ultimately, though, I would say, like, if you're using like 2% alcohol and water to sterilize something, that would still get the job done.
Yeah.
But I think that because they're also seeing like a gradual increase in the antimicrobial activity as the concentration increases, then you can, sort of safely assume and understand that something within the extract itself, as the extract concentration increases, is having more antimicrobial effect. Okay. And you're right in that there was some weird like translational things with this paper. There were some elements where I was reading and I was just like, what is going on now? I don't know if that was translation or if this journal is new. I was sort of like poking around. It's a journal that has been out since I think 2020, since 2021. So it's only been out for about a year. It has accreditation with, science regulatory bodies over in India. But it's a relatively new journal that's headquartered in India. And in addition to sort of this study being shorter in length, it also seems like they were sort of building on studies that were previously done by this group. So sort of expanding on stuff that they had already done. So maybe the detailed review of was this methanol or was it the alkaloids in kratom had occurred in a publication previous to this.
Yeah, and in the abstract, it has conclusion. It says, in conclusion, there's no correlation between nutritional status and remission outcome of patients with ALL in the induction phase of therapy. I think that was from another study or something, because what patients are they talking about? Because this is like a lab study with no humans, and they're talking about underweight patients and nutrition needs and therapy outcomes, and there was nothing in the study that had anything to do with this.
It's so a thick red highlight on my PDF, and it says, "Is this from a different study?"
Yeah, I said, "Is it a misprint or something?" But it. Yeah. So maybe you're right that there was a whole other study that this correlates with. However, that just kind of is there, and there's nothing else. I'm like, what patients? Mm-hmm. I don't know. So that was a little weird. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, I remember this from Indonesia. It was like right when COVID started. So I think there's a lot of questions about whether what kratom does and stuff, and because right when COVID started, one of the ministers of some department, like maybe the health department or whatever in Indonesia, announced, well, we have a lot of indigenous medicinal plants that could help with symptoms like kratom was one of them. You know, his statement kind of got picked up by a lot of these kratom blogs, and that turned into, does kratom cures coronavirus? And then I wrote a blog post that said, no, it doesn't cure coronavirus. This guy was just saying, if you get sick, like, you know, there was no vaccine at the time, so he was basically telling people that, you know, there's a lot of indigenous plants that will help you feel better, which turned into... So I guess, I don't know if this study is actually, you know, they're trying to find out in Indonesia whether kratom actually does help with certain illnesses that have nothing to do with COVID. But yeah, I guess there's interest.
I mean, and in that case too, it would be like strep throat, right? COVID is a viral vector, and it's a virus. So you know, the fact that this compound that they're pointing to as a potential mechanism for antimicrobial activity is based on essentially choking out the cell's ability to make ADP or ATP. So, like, you know, the molecules that power the cell and the processes in the cell. So they think it interferes with that conversion to the ATP molecule. You know, that's not a relevant concern or active molecule target for viral diseases or illnesses. And, you know, I also, you know, just searching on this compound, how are we pronouncing it? Quercetin?
Quercetin, yeah.
Quercetin. It looks like you can just buy it off the shelf at like a GNC, you know, a plant flavanol. And so, you know, I guess it would have been interesting too with this study if they did the microbial activity, but then they actually compared it to like what we would consider an advanced pharmaceutical antimicrobial. So like a penicillin or some other like antibacterial compounds, because if I had to guess, the antibacterials are far more effective at lower concentrations at sort of wiping out the growth of the strep and the E. coli than just this plant-based compound alone.
Yeah.
Quercetin.
Quercetin. Okay.
There we go.
Quercetin.
That sounds right. Yeah, okay, cool. Mm-hmm. Quercetin. Okay, so you can actually buy that as a supplement. Oh, just kind of like tagging on to what I was just talking about the health minister saying the plants there. In the introduction, it says there's about 40,000 species of medicinal plants that have been known in the world, and 30,000 of them are suspected to be located in Indonesia. Of these, 25% are known to have herbal properties or medicinal plants. However, only 1,200 types of plants have been used for raw materials for herbal medicines. And I was like, if there's 1,200 are used and 7,500 are known, how do they know 30,000 are medicinal?
Yeah, interesting.
I was just wondering about that. But yeah, in a tropical region, you would expect them to have a lot of different medicinal plants. Oh, and they also said people consume kratom leaves by chewing, brewing like a tea, or smoking. And I looked up the sources for this, because the smoking thing, it just doesn't seem right. So I looked up their source. The source literally said kratom leaves are crushed or powdered, are readily available on the internet and stores in most states, but this material is not reported to be used by nasal insufflation, smoking, or intravenously. There have been some reports of leaf smoking in Southeast Asia, but this does not appear to be common. They got this from a U.S. That was their source. There's little evidence or apparent risk that kratom products are used by routes other than oral beverage or food consumption, even though it's theoretically possible to smoke. So that was their source of them saying it's people smoke it. So I just always check these things because it just bothers me that people keep saying that you smoke it and people don't really do that. So anyway.
Or encephalate for that matter.
Yeah. Is that snorting?
Yeah.
Okay. And it also
There's
says
no activity there.
Yeah.
I can imagine encephalating that green powder. I mean, it'd be like the cinnamon challenge. You'd like choke yourself to death.
Oh, I did a toss and wash with like an extract once, and I coughed before I could drink the water, and it was all up in my nose, and it was just terrible for about 10 minutes. So yeah, like somebody asked me if you could snort it, and I'm like, if you want to play a joke on somebody, tell them that look, this stuff, you should snort it. That would be like a mean joke. It says produces a stimulant at low doses and sedative at high doses. Diarrhea, and then it just says diarrhea, smooth blood circulation, increase endurance and stamina, prevent constipation. It just says diarrhea. It doesn't say if it causes or prevents it. I think it prevents it. And then it says prevent constipation, so that seems like, the opposite. So anyway, I'm just nitpicking about their introduction, but I see this a lot, and I wish they would just get that part a little bit more right.
Yeah. There's like no precedent in the marketplace or the literature for those types of methods of administration. So it is weird that they just sort of persist. It's like that game of publication telephone that we talk about, where the first person says like, this maybe might be involved in this sort of, and then 3 papers later it's involved in.
Yeah. And it also says treatment for diabetes and reduced sugar. So I looked up those sources. It was just came down to like one anecdotal report of a lady being diabetic, and one other said it's reported to be an anti-diabetic, but there's no study it points to on diabetes. And then it says the activity of kratom as an antimicrobial cannot be separated from composition contained in the kratom leaves, including a high content of phenolics and flavonoids and the menthol extract of kratom leaves. And you were just talking about that. I think that phenolics and flavonoids are known to be antimicrobial. Are they in general, or just this quercetin?
Quercetin.
Yeah.
I think there is some precedent that these flavonoids and like other alkaloids made by plant compounds have antimicrobial activity. I mean, there are plants that, just like in production of cannabinoids, like produce these terpenes or flavonoids or active compounds as a defense mechanism. And even like within cannabis, for example, there's just certain strains that are more hardy and can be in like a dark, moist or warm, moist environment, but not get stricken with powdery mildew or other types of mold or fungus growth. And it's presumably because of compounds that they're producing at a little bit higher concentration than others, similar and close to that. So, in some ways, I think that there is precedent to say like there is microbial activity at these compounds. We know it has antimicrobial activity, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're as effective as like, say, penicillin or other antibiotics. I thought it was interesting. Maybe we should just mention with this one as well. So essentially, they did the extract. They got as much of the methanol out as they can, one presumes, and then they used various concentrations that were pipetted onto cell plates. So like basically, these cell plates are a sterile agar environment that has some sort of food or nutrients there, such that like if there was bacteria, they're able to thrive, they're able to grow, they're put in an incubator. And so, they show some pictures of the plates and you can see where growth is and where growth has been inhibited. But then after that step, when they were looking at the target classes, like trying to figure out, okay, well, what could it be inside of the extract that is actually leading to this antimicrobial activity? They did a literature search using so the URL is like something in Switzerland. It's a protein like database where essentially, they were able to throw in the nature of the compounds that they were looking at, and then seeing the interactions, known or published interactions with other molecules or cellular processes in the bacteria. And that's how they arrived at this quercetin. That's what pointed them to that. So they went from a real world like in vitro, then over to this in silico, which is, from an open data science perspective, nice to see.
Are there like flavonoids in cannabis as well? It says that they're associated with a wide spectrum of health promoting effects and are indispensable components in a wide range of applications. This is due to its antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, anti-mutagenic, and anti-carcinogenic properties, coupled with its capacity to modulate the function of key cellular enzymes.
So what you're pointing to, I think, is that key interaction is about inhibiting the ATP activity, and thus the ability for the microbials to grow.
Yeah. What about that? Is ATP like an enzyme?
No, ATP is a molecule, so it's triphosphate, and so like the phosphate groups get added in this chain of 3 phosphates, and then as that phosphate bond breaks, energy is released, and that energy release is used to actually like mechanically drive all of the cellular processes in life. It's certainly like, if you look at photosynthesis is a way for the plants to use light energy to turn into ADP, whereas like getting that energy from consuming other biological material is how we do it, outside of photosynthesis. But all of them are driving to produce these ATP, which is then used to fuel the mechanisms or all the cellular processes. It's like the only way you can get ions to go across, like against their concentration gradient, is to, expend energy. And that's what this stuff is used for.
Okay. And now I was like wondering about, they were talking about flavonoids and they're like antioxidant, antimicrobial, are flavonoids found in like all plants? Like I hear stuff like are they in like cannabis as well? Okay.
Yeah, certainly. And in fact, I was reading, there's a study that came out today that was the characterization of novel flavonoid compounds that weren't terpenes inside of cannabis strains that are like very closely related to garlic. But yeah, these flavonoids are all over the plant and animal kingdom. But again, I think, like they have antimicrobial activity in so much as they aren't fostering or like promoting bacterial growth. It's not necessarily that all of them were evolved to serve an antimicrobial or antibacterial, purpose, right?
Okay.
It's just sort of that they do and they can. But I don't think and this is, I'm talking out of school here because I don't know for sure, but I still don't think like you would, if you had a bacterial infection, I don't think you would want to go get a quercetin supplement and then just call it a day, right? You probably would want to go and look at more targeted antimicrobials.
Okay. And so, like, the main question I had was just, I mean, is it kratom especially, or is it just anything with quercetin that's going to have the same results as this study? It did say that the quercetin content in the methanol kratom extract is quite high. The presence of quercetin as a subflavonoid gives hope that the content of kratom has a good effect for use as a herbal medicine. In this study, we found that quercetin has a high pharmacokinetic effect on absorption in the gastrointestinal tract. So it's found in all kinds of plants. Can kratom as an individual plant really get the credit, or if somebody eats a lot of spinach, is that going to do the same thing for their E. coli?
But presumably, if you have high concentrations of the quercetin content, then it would have the same activity. It's not necessarily unique to kratom. I mean, and I didn't realize that it was in so many, like, kale, many fruits and vegetables, leaves, but maybe kratom has more than the standard bear, but I would say any plant compound or any plant species that has this would presumably have some degree of antimicrobial activity. And I mean, it was in order to kill the E. coli, it was concentrations of more than 12.5%, and for the strep greater than 4%. So as long as you can get an analogous concentration of the quercetin, I think that we would see the same effects.
Okay. So everybody listen, it's really the quercetin. Although this isn't medical advice, so if you have E. coli, go to a doctor. For one thing, you wouldn't know if you had that if you didn't go to a doctor. So
yeah.
And there was another thing in the discussion that says it has been found that kratom leaves contain alkaloid, flavonoid, steroid, saponin, and tannins, and have antioxidant effect. Steroid, is that right? Can a steroid be in a plant?
Yeah, so steroids, okay. I think in the notion of that are signaling molecules. So I think a steroid is just sort of defined by the core, chemical structure that it is. It's got 4 rings, and those 4 rings are arranged in a specific way. But yeah, they definitely are signaling molecules, not only in humans and animals, but also in plants, certainly.
It says if the concentration of the extract continues to increase, it can reduce the killing power. This finding suggested that the increasing concentration of kratom can lead to an increase in viscosity of the extract, thus affecting the rate of diffusion of extract in the agar media. In addition to the concentration factor, the type of antimicrobial material can also determine the ability to inhibit bacterial growth. So what they found was up to a certain level, this extract had antibacterial effects, but then if it kept going higher, then it didn't have those effects. Is it just a problem with the medium? Is it the problem like with the kratom or anything else?
I think that it's just because we have like a thick resinous gunk ball, right, that isn't really like fusing across the plate. Okay. Generally, when you add stuff to a plate, you sort of drop it in the middle, and then you have this sterile glass rod that you use, and you spin the plate to get it spread out all over. But my guess would be, and how they're describing it to me sounds like, it's essentially just too thick to be dispersed very well across that plate, and where it doesn't, bacterial growth can occur where the compounds haven't reached yet.
Does studies like this usually translate well to animal or human studies? Do they usually find similar things? Because it seems like, once you do an in vivo study, there'd be a lot more going on with, with metabolism and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think you're dead on with that, like metabolism. So there will be all sorts of enzymes, like broad metabolistic enzyme family classes. We talk about the cytochrome or the P450 or that whole family of enzymes. One would assume that the quercetin would be degraded or maybe even inhibited by the activity of those like extra enzymes that are just in the stew of a in vivo. You know, and you know what it made me think of too is like, okay, well, shoot, if people are consuming powder, are they messing up their gut bacteria? And how could that, you know, I would assume, you know, it's sort of indiscriminately being antibacterial. So it's not like it's just taking out bad stuff and leaving in the good stuff. And they didn't really seem to mention it that much, just from like ingestion and its effects on the gut bacteria that I remembered. That like, so people that actually consume kratom might have their gut biome disrupted in a way that is not ideal.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I know, but I think it's the opioid effects that cause constipation like any other opioid does. But also, I'm because I don't, you know, I've always used a tea and I never had that problem. So, like, my first initial thought was, well, if somebody's consuming powder with water, then you got a ball of cement in your stomach. If you're, I mean, it's just a little ball. If it's a teaspoon or two, but it's kind of like, you know, physically blocking. Method of administration would make it different, and the results from a petri dish would not translate equally to what's going on in your gut.
Well, yeah, especially in your gut. You know, you have first pass metabolism there. Like that's like the, you know, that's the place where the enzymes involved in degrading down other molecules and especially bioactive molecules are there. So it's there would certainly be some first pass metabolism. It's not like really, I think even there's any industrial value here. Like I don't think that we can make a quercetin spray that would be antimicrobial that you would want to use like over just an alcohol or a bleach or something like that. I think they're just more trying to flush out if there is antimicrobial activity, what is responsible for it, and then from there, it says may be used in the prevention and treatment of various infectious bacterial diseases and may provide treatment option to reduce the use of antibiotics. So I guess what I've been saying this whole time about how like modern antibiotics are stronger, maybe that could be a bad thing from the idea of antibiotic resistance, and that something like this could be used instead. Pretty straightforward paper. I thought that, you know, it was interesting to think about this in light of COVID and just sort of disease transmission overall. It's not antiviral, and so it's not necessarily directly applicable to COVID and the current state of the world. Relative to the other papers that we are typically reading about, pain-killing effects, pain relief, or opiate addiction or opiate use disorder, it was just kind of nice to get a breather on this one to look at kratom and its potential uses or implications from another angle.
I would just say that it's mostly the quercetin that's doing the activity here, and I know a lot of like kratom advocates. I mean, sometimes it's just vendors that want to sell you kratom as a miracle cure, but then there's like sincere advocates that see a headline like this and want to put it out there that kratom might help with E. coli or something like that. But it's one of the reasons I like to look at these studies and stuff is so I can translate them to people and try to get it out there, the fact that a lot of these things are complex. I mean, that's why the last one we did, the study showed that mitragynine caused cognitive impairment in high doses in mice over a few weeks, and that same team put out a study like a month later that said it causes cognitive improvement in mice that are going through morphine withdrawal. So it doesn't necessarily mean that this exactly happens to humans because of this one study, and I think it's good to just look at it and just understand that these things are complex, and it's better not to ignore the negative and then take the positive and try to use that to advocate. Instead, just try to understand what's going on here, just like the scientists are trying to do.
Yeah, certainly.
Once again, thus far, we don't ask for donations, we don't advertise, so please support us by liking, sharing, subscribing, commenting, rating, reviewing, wherever you listen to podcasts. Find Dr. Jonathan Cachet, who we thank as always and are very grateful for, on social media at jcachet. Kratom Science Journal Club is produced by me, Brian Gallagher. Music is Captain Big Wheel. The song is called Moonrunner. And we're grateful for you, the listener. Happy Thanksgiving, and take care.